I'm Dorothy Rowe, and it is a huge privilege and pleasure for me to be with my friend Andrew Hewson, whose work I have the utmost respect and appreciation for. Andrew has been presenting perspectives on the enlightenment or awakening process publicly for some time now. What is it, Andrew? About a year or 2 years, something?
Yeah, about 2 years or something like that.
Yeah, that's enough time to make some great inroads. And part of the beauty of Andrew's and my intention, Andrew made the suggestion we come together, and this intention as an offering to the entire collective of our precious world family to support our global navigation through the crisis of this pandemic for the sake of everyone's maximally beneficial outcome, for the sake of providing insights, deep insights and understandings into the mechanics of what's really happening here from a global or cosmic perspective, to allow each individual to position themselves in relationship to this crisis in a way which will provide an evolutionary outcome for everyone. So that's the idea. Is we want to reestablish everybody's staying in. Most, like half the world I read yesterday, at least half our world is self-isolating to some degree or another. So we're in our cocoons and we're in that space where we can self-refer, where we can reflect, self-reflect. And this is the perfect time to reset and rejuvenate and redefine our relationship with each other and with the world, with our microbial reality, right? With the whole microbial scheme of Earth and everything. So it's time. This is the time for this. And both Andrew and I are very grateful. I'm sure. Anyway, I'm very grateful. I'm
very grateful as well. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
For himself, that we're both really grateful for this moment to share.
Yes.
So, without further ado, let us share. My perspective is that I am an energy healer, and I correlate the experiences of consciousness with forms and functions of the physiology. So if we look at the respiratory area, and I already have one video up on sort of generalities about the respiratory system and its relationship to the COVID-19. So I'm not going to repeat that information. You can check out that video if you like, but I would like to say that just sort of more of a brief overview is that this respiratory system is where experience of oneself as universal, because the big universal air shared by all, becomes experience of self as individual. And what it appears to me is that in this junction between the universal and the personal or the individual, that the point of maximum expression, or that junction point, like the gap, the finest gap between the universal and the personal, is in the alveoli of the lungs, because that's the spot where the air gets inside the little balloons, the multiple little balloons, the alveoli in the lungs, and it fills up. And so that's a spot where what the body expresses is individuality and collective reality simultaneously, because we can't live with one alveoli alone, right? We need a whole set of them. So think of it like the bronchial tube, and then the tubes that go into the lungs, like an upside down branches of a tree, and then the alveoli are like all the little leaves on the tree. And if the tree only had one leaf, it just wouldn't be a healthy tree. So we need all of them. So what we have going on at that point of the physiology is we have each alveoli representing experience of self and expression of self as an individual, and yet they work together as a collective. So
Mm.
we've got collective and individual expression and experience going on simultaneously. So, and that's right at the junction between knowing oneself. We could say ego. If we think of the word ego, defined as sense of self, where sense of self has opened itself up to express itself as both individual parts which work together as a collective. So this is the junction between, it's actually expressed in the form of the physiology between collective expression of self and individual expression of self. And by no coincidence, this is where COVID-19 sits in the body and clogs up the whole system, which hopefully doesn't clog up everybody's whole system. But in those cases where it gets fully clogged, then respiration is no longer an option. And that's the end. So wherever the body falls ill, this is where our attention is being drawn or directed in order to shine the light of awareness into that area, to wake it up and to support evolution and growth in that specific area. And by my perception, there are other parts of the physiology which do this similar, which play similar roles. For instance, in the digestive process, there's that point where the food goes from being an external product which you've consumed to actually becoming your body. And that's in the mitochondria of the cells. That finest point of the digestive process takes place in the mitochondria, where the minerals are transformed into energy, into physical material of the body, etc. And again, what we're seeing at that spot is this structure which is individualized, in the case of the mitochondria, even more specified as an individual, because the mitochondria are actually bacteria which came into our bodies thousands of years ago as separate individuals from our physiologies, and have learned to live synergistically with us. And all of them together, taken together as a great collective, provide that function of allowing the food to become something which we think of as separate from ourselves, to being integrated. So I do feel that an integration of ego is part of the story that we're looking at here, as far as collective evolution through the crisis of this global pandemic. All right, those are my thoughts.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dorothy. I'll just tag on to that. And what I'm seeing is, as you're describing this junction point where the universal meets the individual, and how there's no accident that this is where we see the expression of the coronavirus, is also this junction point where our global level of unresolved fear, anxiety, stress, lack, also the junction point where that turns into the individual portion. So in conjunction with this expression of the coronavirus and its physical presentation, or its presentation within the physiology, we also see the surfacing of a lot of this unresolved material. And it's coming together right at this this junction point where the global level of unresolved fear or lack, or ideas of security and experience, and so on and so forth, meet the individual level of these remnants or residues of taking ourselves to be separate from our own divinity are arising. So we have an opportunity to resolve not only our more individuated portion of this material right now, but also to see that junction point and where it directly ties into the collective or the global level of that unresolved fear and emotion that correlates with the illusion of separation.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, I was looking at this exact point yesterday, and it occurred to me that there's been an illusion that has been held collectively for a long time, which is that when I feel an emotion or feeling within myself, that I take responsibility. It's good to take responsibility for your own stuff.
Sure.
I'm not saying don't take responsibility, but what I am saying is that, building off of your point, Andrew, is that there is a level of collective imbalance, which is so big and has been with us as a human race for so long. And we have attempted to address it for thousands of years. 2,000 years ago or more, we were putting our greatest champion up in front of this. One man, the collective would create one soul who was enlightened or was at some high level and go, you go out and you face that thing yourself, and found that that wasn't enough. That such individuals were usually crushed or crucified. So then the thought came, well, what if we put a whole army of people out in front of this darkness? And so this was the great experiment of the last century, was from the time of the First World War through, and it maybe even could have started around the time of the revolutions even, which would have been 1800s. That's kind of started to build during that time, and the Civil War, which was trying to just focus on one part of the darkness. Our American Civil War was an attempt to deal with just that aspect, which had to do with slavery. And I know there were other political influences during the Civil War, but energetically, my experience was that it was that point that was the crux of pulling Americans away from their dependence upon slavery and the manifestation of that problem in our country. Anyway, then First World War, Bolshevik Revolution, also the Spanish flu came right in there after the First World War. Bolshevik Revolution, Second World War was a whole, basically 2 generations of people which just gave themselves to try to eliminate this collective imbalance that had been the source, that had been identified collectively as the source of suffering on earth. And when we did that, it didn't work. So now we're at this place where the idea is, all right, I mean, there were some little bits of rebirth that came out of that. So the new approach is make an army, a great, huge, massive collective of enlightened individuals, of champions. One champion, not strong enough. Great mass of people, not good enough. But how about a great mass of champions? And so what I see happening is this global awakening of consciousness, which is bringing masses of people's consciousness up to a higher level of functioning. And then collectively, we have to work together, right? We have to integrate, which is why Dorothy and Andrew are having this video in the first place. And so, and I agree that part of that story, part of the making of a champion, is about integrating one's direct experience of self, ego or sense of self, the individual sense of self with the cosmic sense of self, with the universal sense of self, because that opens resources, universal or cosmic resources, to the individual. And that provides a platform of functioning which is more secure. There's that option of taking awareness to the source of creation, where one is safe of all relative influences. And of course, access to all resources. And so I think one side of the story is the direct experience of universal self and individual self, and the other side of that story is the integration. So that it's something that's stable and it's always there and it's always applicable and accessible.
Exactly. And what we're seeing right now is sort of a creative tension that is developing through this virus, and it's an opportunity for us to contextualize all of that material that is based in the illusion of separation from a more collective perspective, from a more global perspective, which actually gives some space around it, a little bit more flexibility and a little less identification. And when we're able to see that junction point where the global expresses itself as the individual, and we don't have to necessarily be able to directly perceive it, but just to intuit it, to sense that these are simultaneously present, that collectively there is this tension associated with the virus that has to do with fear or uncertainty, what's going to happen, whatever the case may be, and a concern for our loved ones, our financial situation, all of those various levels. And there's also how that is expressing on a more individual level. And the simultaneity of both of these levels allows for a non-identified observation of this phenomena, of this content as it is arising, which directly correlates with its resolution. Because when that more separate sense of self is not restructuring through the emergence of this fear and concerned solely with what seems to be its own separate life, and there's a capacity to recognize that this is actually a collective emergence that's expressing itself on the individual level, then now that sense of self is no longer being re-solidified, and that material is being resolved.
Nice.
And directly correlates with integration and the recognition of our reality as the context of conscious awareness itself, which is actually the container, the field for both of these levels, both the collective or the global and the individual.
I love that. I love it. Yes. Yes. Your description of how self-positioning in a way where one is, I think you said, non-self-identified, was that the word you used?
Mm-hmm.
That then it provides the platform for an approach to witnessing the experience that allows it to resolve effortlessly,
Yes.
like, because the laws of nature of evolution are happening anyway.
Yes.
That's part of the whole context of collective self.
Mm.
I'd like to add one thing.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
want to say? No, go ahead.
I was going to just say that it's not a matter of it's not a matter of not identifying with anything as an action or something that we do, but simply being able to see that correlative presentation of both the collective surfacing and what's surfacing on a more individual level automatically creates some space. And through that space of being able to see that this is not just my stuff, it belongs to the whole, it belongs to the human experience. And what is coming up here is an individualized portion or expression of what is present on a global level with varying degrees of the awareness of that.
Yes.
Then that automatically begins the resolution of that material in a way that it wasn't being resolved when we were taking it to be something that was so private and separate and independent from everything else.
Yes, I totally agree. I feel that this pattern, it's an old pattern of taking personal responsibility. It's almost like there's been a sort of a kind of a bifurcation or a kind of bipolar approach in the collective for a really, really long time, for transgenerational stress of many, many, many years of people either looking at problems in terms of, oh, well, I don't feel I have the resources to deal with it, so I'm just going to run away. And our whole culture and society really supporting that with the presence of all sorts of various social constructs that help a person. If you want to run away, here you go. There are so many different channels and avenues you can take to run away. Or the opposite of that, which is, well, if I'm taking responsibility, then I must take responsibility for all of it. And then it's like this totally overwhelming thing. Here I am as an individual trying to take responsibility for this entire collective imbalance. And it's just, it can be crushing for people. And I think out of that is much of that patterning, that ancestral patterning of feeling like insufficient and not good enough. And I think you mentioned the word lack earlier, maybe before we started recording, I'm not sure. But yeah, all those feelings. And so either of these two approaches seem to exacerbate the illusion that's surrounding all the imbalance in the first place.
Yes, yes, I've seen that that aspect of it as well that you're describing, where it's almost like the collective then is taken on as a burden on the individual level, and
Yeah.
that's not supportive, and it's not really in alignment with the highest order of evolutionary intelligence that's possible. Although there are some tendencies present, depending on one's karma, that will favor moving in that direction, or, as you said earlier, perhaps even moving in the direction of renunciation. So either one of these extremes isn't really allowing for the fullness of our evolutionary intelligence to come online. But when we're able to just recognize the simple simultaneity and see that junction point, then it does allow for a space of intelligent resolution, which is neither a burden nor something that needs to be run away from in the context, or pushed to the side in the context of renunciation or brushing off, dismissing as unimportant.
Yeah. I was also thinking of runaway as like people who lose themselves in alcohol and drugs,
Oh, of course, yes.
or other types of distractions like that. That's a little different from renunciation, but in that same direction of, I'm just not going to deal with the problem. My solution to the problem is not to deal with the problem.
Yes.
I'd like to add that this is something interesting that I noticed, which is around the end of 2019, before the virus surfaced. So we're kind of looking at a little bit like, I'm looking a little bit at the mechanics of how it is that this particular form came into our world to be the catalyst for this particular aspect or expression. It just so brilliantly put a stop to so many things, right? It did, like, we've been wanting this, and then it happened so effortlessly, essentially. But what I saw happen was that, the horrible fires that were burning through Australia I think it was in the fall, like October or so.
Yes.
Here. It started with a great sacrifice of life, actually. There were, I think, over 2 billion animals were lost in that fire. So it was a very big sacrifice of life on the level of our Earth's biodiversity. And it opened the door for the Indigenous people of Australia to complete a sacred act that had been interrupted years before, which was an interaction with Uluru, which is the Ayers Rock in Australia. And Uluru is known as one of the chakras of the earth.
Okay.
So there's kind of a very special energy center there at Uluru. And what happened was the planetary alignments were correct on January 12th, 2020, for the completion of this particular ceremony that had been started previously but interrupted. And when the ceremony was complete, a blockage that was sitting in the collective deep levels, the more abstract levels of collective consciousness, unblocked. There was some collective karma that got switched over there.
Yes, I remember watching your video where you discussed this.
Yeah, and so that light started to shine on this collective darkness that's been sitting, like, repressing humanity for centuries. And I'm wondering, Andrew, because your beautiful point, I love your point about the space. that when the individual is able to self-position so that both the universal and the individual perspectives are married, you could say,
Yes.
are held through the instrument of oneself, that there's a little bit of an interactive space, like a lively dynamism. Does that correlate with your experience?
Yes, yes.
Lively dynamism there in that junction between the universal and the individual, and that in that silent gap or that silent space, that dynamism awakens. And that dynamism is the expression of evolutionary transformation. But it does illuminate the imbalances as well. It gives rise to purification. And what I've been noticing is a lot of purification ever since January 12th. That was happening kind of under the surface. It was kind of in there massaging those finer levels of the field of consciousness, and starting to cause a surfacing of those imbalances. By the time they reach the surface, my feeling is that the purification process is well underway, and the imbalance is actually on its way out. We're seeing it as it walks out the door. There it goes, right? But I do feel that it was the shining of that light of collective awareness on this collective darkness that was responsible for waking up, or I would say catalyzing a purification of that darkness. It had been safe. It was sitting camouflaged under the surface for ever so long. And it was a foundation for a lot of material structures of the surface that were allowing imbalances to just keep going and going and going and not get resolved. And now resolution is upon us.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, beautiful. And just going back to that, to the space you were discussing, and in correlation with that lively dynamism, there's also this a changeless level of observation that is recognized. So these two aspects are simultaneously cooperating, you might say, in this in the equanimity that arises in reference to the individual aspect and the global aspect. And so this is like just a natural balancing that takes place. It's really effortless. It's not something that we do, but more allow to arise. And when we allow that to arise, then we're beginning to witness some real resolution that, of course, correlates with our recognition of our reality as being timeless and immortal, we could say, on some level. And also with the integration of that and the human level of experience. So there's a lot of healing that's taking place. There's the capacity for refined perception, which also can come online through this level of resolution. So it's really a great gift when we see it as a gift. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. When my perception is that balancing that takes place between that deep inebriating silence, that stillness of eternal being with the dynamic expression is orchestrated from a level of intelligence within the being that I use the word Davic to describe.
Yes.
But when I use that word, I'm referencing laws of nature, which are responsible for the evolutionary expression of the interplay between the silence and the dynamism. And that level of our intelligence is maintained in highest health through the byproduct of the consciousness that filters through the human physiology, that the food we eat, The food we eat goes through the digestive process, and at the finest level of the digestive process, very, very fine materials are produced by the human physiology, which actually nurture or nourish that particular aspect of universal intelligence to allow it to be as robust and powerful and integrated as it can possibly be. And that the human condition is actually an integral part of the entire network or the entire system of this universal expression of self, essentially. Because we have this, it's like if that inebriating silence, that deep, deep silence at the source of creation, if it didn't have all this manifest form and all these human physiologies and all this big universe, it would be just sitting unexpressed. But by creating itself as expression, the expression folds back to that silence and actually interacts. There's an interactive element that takes place there, which allows that whole picture to progress forward in a way it would not otherwise. Because if we think of God as like God is everything, knows everything, is everything, all powerful, all present, then what does God have to do? Nothing. Does God ever get a surprise? Never. Right? Because God is already everything before it happens. So there are no surprises. There's no learning new stuff. There's no moment of aha. There's no moment of aha. But because of the nature of the whole relative field interacting with that silence, then God gets to have God's cake and eat it too. Be that wholeness of everything and complete silence and everything is, and have that aha experience and have a surprise birthday party and have all those different things, learn new things, all that.
Yes, and a part of that play within the relative, as far as the exploration of surprises or the navigation of phenomena that are arising on that level, also is the opportunity for divinity to turn back towards itself and to fully rely on its own reality through its expression as the human physiology.
Oh, I love that.
This is where it's more of a surrender. It's a status of surrender and recognizing that supreme truth, that supreme authority of divinity, which is none other than our most fundamental reality, and allowing that then to enliven and activate those laws of nature that are present in such a way that we do see that cohesive, unified level of resolution taking place on both the individual and the global level.
Oh, beautiful, Andrew. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. That all that creative expression, all that explosive energy that kind of works its way out to the surface, when it turns around, it goes back to the source. Then from there, the focus is on the integrative process. It's on that exact point of the process that's necessary for the whole for the global healing to take place. It's absolutely beautiful. Through my own lexicon, I would describe that as focusing awareness at that finest level of self and bringing the aspect, the finest expression, because something when the healing process is there, when the transformation process is there, there's some manifestation, there's some expression that's not just flat, absolute, but there's some little dynamism. And that in that ocean of dynamism, there are regions. And all the regions they resonate. They have different types of effects that they produce. And there's a region for integration. There is a region that's whole thrust, or all the laws of nature that are expressed in that part of consciousness are specifically for the integration of individuality and universality, and specifically for an expansion, and I would say an integration and expansion of what we think of as ego or sense of self, from an isolated, separate individual state into an integrated state where the answer is yes, there's individuality and there's universality, and they actually are all expressions of the same reality.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's an area, and that when the awareness gets comfy, and at the process of digging down into those very abstract levels, can isolate out regions of all different types and varieties and to produce all sorts of different effects. Because the focus of our attention carries that byproduct of finest digestion with it. Wherever the attention focuses, all that resource that is born of the spontaneously born of the human condition goes with our attention. Your attention goes and all the resources go too. So then it feeds that aspect, or whatever aspect we're looking for.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. Yes, I mentioned earlier about this creative tension that is present through this, or is expressing itself on some level as this coronavirus. And you were just kind of going back through history a little bit and looking at the Civil War and different experiences or levels of experiencing,
Right.
presentations of experiencing that have arisen within the human kingdom, where there was some shift made through the tension that was present there, but it wasn't really maximized to its full potential. So now we have the opportunity collectively to work on a level that we previously have not had. And I see that throughout mankind's history, or what most consider recorded history at least, there has been this manifestation of creative tension. It reaches a threshold and then there's a collapse.
Right.
And there's only very, very little progress made. So it's just incremental steps that are being taken. Some are a little bit bigger, some are a little bit smaller. And this manifestation of creative tension, threshold collapse, is just continuously operative on so many levels. But here we have the opportunity to participate in it consciously through what I will call the resistance threshold release function. So we have this unconscious level of collective expression through creative tension, threshold, and then a collapse. But then when we bring that into the conscious experiencing that is awake to itself and aware of its innate intelligence and this capacity, then we have the opportunity for there to be the resistance threshold release function. So resistance arises naturally. Resistance is just a part of experiencing. It's not a matter of not resisting, but seeing when resistance arises. When resistance arises and it is seen as resistance, then automatically there's the opportunity for the release or the attentive allowing of that resistance.
Beautiful.
So I had a little tingle in the throat come on a couple weeks ago, and it was, maybe about a week and a half ago, in alignment with this whole thing. And I had watched your video on just some protocol in reference to the coronavirus, so I was aware of your methodology and suggestions. And but I was noticing also that this was being used or utilized by the intelligence to surface some various positions or unresolved portions of fear or lack or different things like that. And so as that arose and there was a resistance or an automatic sort of shutting down in the seeing of that material, the seeing of that resistance then allowed for an automatic release of the resistance or an attentive allowing. And this is sort of just like a repetitive flow of experiencing. So phenomena arise, there's a subtle resistance that can correlate with the phenomena, and this is going to be different for every point of reference. But then as that resistance is seen from a space of pure observation, from a space of pure conscious presence as resistance, then that seeing then allows for an attentive release, an attentive relaxation or allowing. And this sort of replaces the unconscious level of this collective tension building, reaching a threshold and then collapsing. Now, through there being the attentive allowing, releasing of resistance as it arises through multiple points of reference simultaneously,
Right.
then we see a new threshold is reached, but it's reached through some level of conscious participation. So it's an opportunity to actively participate in this, and for there to be a greater shift in our collective consciousness, in our recognition of our reality through just a simple allowing or releasing of resistance as it arises. So this could be a resistance that's based in the anticipation of the future, what's going to happen, how am I going to deal with this, just basic fear, concern surrounding various symptoms in the body. Not that we don't take necessary precautions or do whatever is called for, but that those measures are coming from a space of release, and they're not coming from a space of resistance.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, when I'm just listening to what you're saying, I'm just going to kind of respond.
Sure.
Is that in the past, the level of creative response to problems or crises has been in the context of like kind of falling into old habits and patterns of like, well, we can just meet fire with fire, kind of like that, an eye for an eye or something like that, a problem is here. Well, let's bring in our destructive forces to obliterate that thing. And I love the idea of witnessing the resistance and then releasing, which is a much more, it's what it's doing is it's approaching the problem not by trying to attack, like two wrongs don't make a right, by attacking the attacker, but to slip into a place of kind of neutrality where one allows the natural tendency of creation, which is to evolve, the whole expanding universe, right? The universe is evolving anyway, and allows those laws of nature, which are already present, which are already functioning.
Yes.
To then slip in. And with laws of nature, we can also talk about the Davic intelligence of creation, can also be seen in those same terms of the laws of nature, that as that slides into the situation, it kind of slides into the gap between where the individual is dealing with that collective problem or challenge. One of the first, I think, and most important things that is released at the level of the collective is this false sense of individual responsibility, collective imbalance. That it's been garbed. That false sense of individual responsibility has been garbed in honor over the course of centuries, and it's been supported at a collective level through collective beliefs and so forth. But it really feeds into it kind of exacerbates or increases the karmic debt that we carry as a collective, which is part of the dynamism of that initial, the word that you use, it's like an imbalance, I guess, or the tension. That was tension. The original tension is essentially, from my perspective, is built up as a byproduct of illusion somehow gripping. People are gripped a little bit by illusion. It seems that the solution is truth. That when we can fall back on truth in its most essential form, in its purest form, that the truth will always support that ability to release. It will support that ability to release. And that's why I brought up the point about Uluru, because there is a light of truth that is connected to what's happening in Australia right now, which is really at a collective level. So it's something that we as individuals can sort of lean on a little bit. We can access that level of collective truth. And it is very helpful at showing exactly the details of the tension. And I think that's part of our individual and collective navigation through this process, is not just kind of sitting back and going, well, I'm doing, my daily meditation, or I'm doing this and that best I can. And then it's just going to have to happen out there somewhere. But that nature wants us to experience it intimately. Nature wants us to experience the collective resolution to this problem individually. That process of awakening to the deep, the yummy, luscious, juicy details of what is actually happening in this huge collective transformation and healing is part of what makes the experience satisfying at a collective level. The fact that as individuals, we really get it. Like nature wants us to really get it,
Yes. And another aspect of what's taking place in the surfacing of this is that a lot of unconscious material is becoming conscious. So someone could have been living their life in a certain way, and then this virus comes and presents itself on the planet, and there were some underlying things that were not being seen, and it's allowing for that unconscious material to surface. So this is happening again, both on a collective level and on the individual level. And as that unconscious material surfaces, there's the opportunity for it to become conscious. And it becoming conscious just means that we're able to see it for what it is. There's a natural seeing. And this correlates with our recognition that we are always the silent seeing of whatever it is arising, We're always the silent field of seeing that what is appearing. So when we begin to tap into that aspect of ourself and see that we are this field of pure seeing itself, then that material that's coming up from the unconscious is being made conscious in the light of that seeing, in the light of that witnessing presence.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, one of the greatest gifts of stopping all the extra activities is that people are left with themselves.
Yes.
Basically. And it's actually beautiful, but I think for a lot of people, and also over the course of centuries, that experience or that time of being left just with one's essential self has been a little bit vilified. It comes up in stories and movies, and so when you have to go in and you have to let go of everything you thought you were, essentially, and just down to the bare bones, basically, and you're just dealing with your own deepest inner stuff, that is like one of the scariest things. That's the scary part of the movie, or when the stories are being told like that.
Yeah, it's not so much like that, because it's much simpler, and it's happening on its own. It's just a simple observing of what's arising, and an attentive recognition of what it actually is. You mentioned earlier about the aspect of those perhaps running away, or alcohol and drugs, and we're also going to see that on the level of eating habits, food, because people are in their homes right now watching lots of television. So there's an opportunity for a lot of these unconscious mechanisms to be made conscious. And it's not necessarily about us going deep into our past and pulling out these huge, terrible traumas or anything like that. Those will, of course, they will come on their own. We don't have to necessarily go look for them. And this may be an opportunity for that type of healing as well. But it can be just simply observing different expressions of behavior, ways of thinking, so on and so forth.
Yes. once the witnessing element is established, then it becomes easier to innocently receive the experiences as they unfold sequentially in a non-judgmental and simple manner that allows for any aspect of self-expression, which is life-supporting, to be enhanced and supported and maintained and integrated, and any expression of individual behavior, which is non-life-supporting, to resolve and complete and fall away, and for new, better cycles of behavior to come in its place. But
Yes.
I think that's part of the fear too, is, well, if I let go with this familiar thing, if I let go of this familiar behavior or this procrastination or digression or thing that I've got going on that I use to avoid looking at myself, then what will I put in its place? What's going to go in there? And the reality is that I feel that what arises next is a little bit like the story of a death and a rebirth, which is that and this is from a Vedic perspective, which is my background, is a Vedic perspective, that at the time of death, the deepest, most heartfelt desire of the individual forms the seed for the next expression of life. So whatever is that deepest, most profound desire, as yet unresolved or unfulfilled, incomplete, that's the one, and it's very spontaneous. It's not something that you can say, well, I'm going to be sure to have this desire, at the moment I die. Or you can try. I think a lot of people do. They'll chant the names.
They did try.
Is there not? And that actually, I think there is some value in that.
Sure, of
If
course.
you're chanting the names of God, chanting God, I love you, I love you, I love you. At the moment of death, that's probably a good thing to do.
Sure.
But that process takes place even before actual death. That process is taking place constantly.
Yes.
In every breath and in every moment. And so the question is, how do we find a way of clearing away all those less important or less life-supporting desires so that we get down to the essential truth? And then that helps wash away the fear of, but if I get rid of this thing I'm familiar with, then what's going to come in its place may be something worse. So right there, like there's a little spot of tension. At least I see that in the collective consciousness. Seems to be a little tender spot right there.
Yeah. In reference to the unknown, the familiar.
Yeah.
Even if it's suffering, it's still familiar on some level. So
right.
This is also where the potency of devotion is very extremely important. Just to have the devotion to, doesn't have to be anything, any specific form, but the devotion to truth itself, the devotion to love itself,
Yes.
And this willingness, the willingness to offer back the lesser for the greater. And even though we may not know what that looks like, it's not within the realm of specifics. So there's no linear security involved in it, And initially faith can be involved, but eventually, and many of us already are tasting an experiential awareness of the reality of our divinity. So it's a lot simpler when we can tune into that aspect of our truth.
Thank you so much for offering the principle of devotion. Love plus service. And the beauty of that is that it integrates the aspects of all four aspects of Dharma, which are, because the service requires clarity and discrimination and intellectual application of wisdom, you could say. So that's the truth aspect of Dharma. And then, of course, the compassion aspect is that combination with a heart full of reverence and respect and appreciation, gratitude. So we put the loving adoration together with the wisdom, And then orderliness is the next step. Connection unstable. We'll see how that goes. Orderliness, thank you, it restabilized. As we're speaking about orderliness.
That's right, that's what.
That the orderliness has to do with being efficient. It's beautiful to have the desire for devotion, but if the action steps taken are wasting energy or wasting time, or they're not performed at a high level of masterfulness of the relative field, then it ends up not being as useful. So orderliness is really important to keep everything moving in a way which is sort of the highest level of expression. And that includes like dignity as well. And then the last one is tapas, which you mentioned so beautifully, which is the lesser giving itself over to the greater, because tapas is austerity, or it's that ability to let go on one level for the sake of, an expansion on another level. And all of these three aspects have to be supported by truth and wisdom and knowledge, because, this is again a transgenerational stress for a lot of people, is self-sacrificing to the point of completely self-obliterating for the sake of others. And that's more common in women, I think. It has been over the centuries, but it has happened. So, this giving of oneself at the individual level for the sake of the whole I'm thinking, Andrew, can it be that there's a way of organizing that so that the giving of oneself for the whole actually reflects back as a benefit for the giver? So it's not like I'm sacrificing. It's not like as an individual, the individual's losing, because the individual is gaining evolutionary value from it. Yes.
Yes, of course. And when I speak of devotion in this context, I understand what you're saying about that sort of could be a possible interpretation of this sort of blind offering that goes out and attempts to give everything on the within the realm of activity, and considers that as a devotion to the collective or devotion to evolution, whatever the case may be. Here I'm talking about something much, much subtler, finer. It's a pure love for the truth of divinity, you see. So it's divinity loving itself.
Oh.
And it's not within the realm of particulars or actions or behaviors. It's prior to that, you see. And it will, that subtler level of devotion will express itself intelligently, always. Will always express itself intelligently. But it is never limited to the expression. The expression is always an expression of devotion. The devotion is not found in the expression necessarily.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. I love that. Yes. Divinity, self-interacting. Yes. Yes. Which is, from my perspective, is the fundamental truth of all of us. Like that's what all this is.
Yes.
Literally everything down to the finest detail is divinity self-interacting. It's just that in this period that we've been in, this period that's kind of a little darker, more suffering period of human history, that the dedication to evolution is so great that there's a willingness on the part of divinity to sacrifice individual comfort for the sake of that evolution. So if there's a choice of like evolving forward with discomfort or being comfort but not evolving, always the choice goes to the evolution, right?
Yes.
So it seems as if one of the principal values, or I would say a useful tool, would be to align oneself with evolution first. So go ahead and put the evolution as the principal focus, because when the evolution occurs smoothly, effortlessly, easily, then also comforts come along with that. Liberation also occurs, and with liberation comes comforts. So if one puts all of one's life force and energy towards just getting that comfort, then one doesn't get the evolution and one doesn't get the comfort either in the long run. But if one puts the focus or the thrust of energies towards the evolution, then one is aligning oneself with the divine self-interaction, which is taking place anyway. And it's, you may be too young to remember the old commercial. There's an old butter commercial or something for margarine. I can't remember, when I was a kid. And there's this goddess, she goes, and she says, "You can't fight Mother Nature." You know, she's like all powerful Mother Nature. And it just reminds me of that. The divinity is folding in on its own nature and it's self-interacting. The results of that are all this diverse manifestation of creation. And if we align ourselves up with that energy, then we have, it's like the whole universe is behind every intention and every thought and every desire and every action.
Yes.
And so it is a way of, it is useful and it does work for those who are out there who haven't tried or who don't. You know, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that supports the idea that this type of alignment does make life go more smoothly.
Of course it does. And the four words that are coming to me right now are "Thy will be done." It's just that simple saying, that simple prayer, whatever it is. It's just a reminder, and it doesn't need to be dualistic. Just the recognition that there is an infinite intelligence present, and that infinite intelligence will bring the experiencing into alignment with itself via its own omnipotence. So it's not necessarily about us deciding what is of the highest evolutionary order and then taking actions based on that or something like that. It's more within the realm of surrendering to the natural evolutionary intelligence, which is already present, already expressing itself, and letting go of this sense of us needing to do that as separate individuals or make that into a job or anything like that.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I agree that ultimately that level of alignment is something that is only effective when it is so fully integrated that it's just spontaneous. Because you're right, Andrew, a person can't take into consideration every little detail, every little ramification of every thought and every word. And, oh, if I say this, then how is that going to affect, you know, the rainforest in Brazil? And if I think of that, how is it going to affect my offspring 4 generations down the road and so forth? It's impossible. It's impossible to come at it from that sort of intellectual or pre-planned position. That you're right, it does come down to more of a deep feeling of devotion, or a deep, or I would say more of an overarching intention. You know, just at a very, very fine level of just being in that alignment. And I also agree that your point about wholeness of creation, and that when awareness is stationed in that spot where it's that silence between the collective level of self and the individual level of self, that awareness is stationed there, it activates and enlivens that. And I think it does spontaneously lead to a natural alignment with the divine process which is taking place.
Yes, it's a part of it's just recognizing that silence is inherent. I mean, intelligence is inherent in silence. So it's not always coming from, mental activity.
Right.
That there can be this intelligent alignment and flow that comes from a rather contentless space of our own pure silence, which is
beautiful.
Which is also
Beautiful.
throbbing as all of creation.
Right. And that intelligence itself is, it occupies both, it's like both the fundamental, which is present in that silence. It's like another angle or another way of looking at that silence is pure intelligence, or pure knowingness, pure perception, pure awareness, pure amness, or pure being. And then there is the organization
Hmm.
of that intelligence within the subtle strata of the manifest field of self,
Yes.
and how that intelligence is able to express itself through the manifest range of the individual so that it's stable at every step of expression, everywhere from the unmanifest field of creation all the way through to the fully physical material level of self. That at each step it's stable and it's stable, it's integrated and stable, integrated and stable, integrated and stable, like that.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. And that a lot of that self-organizing intelligence, as it structures into the perceived presentation of the relative, is coming online in a greater way, we might say, through resolution and healing. So as there's resolution, as there's healing, as there's clearing of some of these blockages or obscurations that are present through our taking ourselves to be so small and limited, then that intelligence, that self-organizing intelligence, just begins to express itself spontaneously.
Right, right. And the thing is that we're standing on the foundation of our forebears.
Mm.
And they didn't even have a word for that silence. They didn't even have, like, they had the word God, but for a lot of our ancestors, God was a sort of male, fatherly, judgmental figure in heaven who was separate, right? Like, that's what they had. So one of the things, part of the dynamism of, or the dynamics of what's happening right now with everybody in their home space and everybody self-referring, everybody self-reflecting, you could say, and purifying, is that we're establishing a new scaffolding, we could say, for understanding a broader range of ways in which divinity experiences itself through us.
Mm.
Because up till now, I mean, God bless our forebears. God bless them all. They were doing the best they could, and they did amazing things. And they brought us to this point, which is just fantastic. But it wasn't their karma to do this. It's our karma to do this.
Yes.
You know, and when I think of it, when I think of the expression of divinity in the entire field of manifestation, it reminds me of like the tip of the iceberg showing. You know, there's that just there, most of the iceberg is in the unseen. And then there's just this little tip that shows at the surface. And so what we're doing is we're learning how to either, we could say, now I'm on the iceberg metaphor. I'm like, oh, is this metaphor going to bring me some boundaries or limitations? Can we say melt the iceberg so that it's just completely integrated with the whole ocean of self? Or could we say, even just like a scientist who looks at the tip of the iceberg and says, okay, you know, based on the size and shape and construct of this tip, I understand the whole iceberg.
Mm.
I understand, and to know that whole iceberg, it's my perception that one of the things that the COVID-19 is doing is it's opening up some channels within all of us to be more acutely aware of what we experience at finer levels of our own expression.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes refinement of perception. That includes consciously recognizing experiences that have been with us all along, which we had through cultural conditioning been taught to ignore. I love you made a point much earlier that some level of intelligence was here all along. We just had to kind of shift over and recognize its presence. And I do feel that that's basically the shift.
Yes, that's a beautiful point that you just made about many human beings already having these recognitions throughout the incarnation, but there's no context for them, or they're pushed to the side, or they're sort of tucked away, hidden away in what is deemed to be more important memories, or whatever the case may be. So I also feel that what you're saying about those experiences coming online or coming up into the field of conscious recognition is also definitely correlating with the presence of the coronavirus. It's
yes,
beautiful point. Thank you.
Yes, and that will provide a foundation for us as a collective to move forward. It was a thought that had occurred to me over time and again, that as a human race, we don't see a lot of evolution. Like, we don't see humanity changing so much in the century, right? And there are things that have been with us, like alcohol has been abused for over 10,000 years, like 12,000 years. I think the earliest record is about 10,000 BC of alcohol use having a destructive effect. Well, we're not dumb, right? Like, we put a man on the moon. Any fool can look at the way alcohol reacts with the human physiology and see that it's damaging. So you'd think that after 12,000 years, we might have figured out to not do that. It's like, it's like somebody hitting themselves in the head. It's like, my head hurts. It's like, well, stop hitting yourself in the head. It just seems like so obvious. It's so obvious.
It goes back to that comfort zone you were talking about. It's that whatever is immediately comfortable trumps for many what is
evolutionary.
The other option, which is oftentimes unseen, unrecognizable from that limited viewpoint that's so focused in on these narrow parameters, see.
Yes. And I know I define myself by taking a stance against alcohol like that. I'm in the minority, but it's not like a judgment on people who are using it, because it has been inculcated into our culture for thousands of years. And it's like a deep stress that's rigidly stuck in the collective. But I'm just using it as an example too, because there are a lot of other things too.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's not a judgment against people who drink. It's just that awareness that we are on the verge of a transformation like we have never seen before.
Yes.
Like we have not seen in 12,000 years. This is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a little bit like the dawning of the seriousness of the coronavirus. When it first started, it was like, oh, well, that's in China. People were like, it's no big deal. But now it's like, it's slowly dawning that this is a very big deal. Mm-hmm. This is a global big deal. When has our entire globe been faced with the same challenge? Everybody faced with the same challenge at the same time. And even as a collective, there's, at the surface, we're a bit struggling to find our way over the challenge. And so the solution, of course, coming from activating the divine connection within, so that the access to the infinite resources of divine intelligence are available to apply themselves to this challenge and find the solution. The solution could be a vaccine, the introduction of an outside chemical into the human body given to everybody. That's a possible solution. But another solution could be an upgrading of the human physiology in such a way that we are so much more than we were. And we're so much more in tune with our environment than we were. That even our environment at a microbial level is not a mysterious, unknown, in the realm of just scientists know about it area of our reality, but it's something that everybody understands and experiences through their refined perception to directly experience that level of creation and realize that there's a huge potential. Just as the introduction of mitochondria into the cellular reality of a corporeal being was, you know, a huge, innovative, and greatly life supporting. It like evolved life forms forward in a way that couldn't have previously. That this could be something like that. It's possible.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
going to everyone. You know, those individuals who adapt, it's possible to adapt in some way or
Of
to
course.
work with that protein. It's basically a protein, right?
Yes.
We know that proteins in the body are some of the great, they're the great catalysts of all sorts of functions in the human body that don't happen without those proteins. And they're also building blocks of the human body. So we know that there's, and it's not like everybody has to become a scientist, but we know that there's a huge infinite potential there. That maybe it's not even the coronavirus specifically itself, but that the coronavirus activates our ability to work individually, personally, but everybody, so globally, all of us work together at that level of nature's intelligence to be able to position ourselves to give and receive maximum evolutionary value to that level of nature's intelligence. I propose the idea.
Yes. Yeah. It can be a blessing in disguise. Yeah. There's always the opportunity for that. In this lifetime, I've seen many things arise that the world considered tragic and terrible and awful, but they were actually blessings in disguise. And I know that many who will be watching this also have had the same experience. You know, it's the Divine Mother is in the business of turning the appearance of lead into gold, you know, effortlessly, not as a volitional action necessarily, but just through the alignment, the willingness to be aligned with truth to the highest degree possible.
Yes, yes, yes. On a side note of gold, I'm taking a class on geology and mineralogical evolution. And scientists, most scientists in the field of astronomy are pretty sure at this point that gold, being denser than the other metals, actually forms the core of some of our great gas giants.
Wow.
I know, right? To think
That's
of
neat.
Jupiter as being filled with a core of gold, I was like, oh, that's so cool.
You better be careful. You might have people trying to fly and go get it.
I know. Good luck. Good luck with that. Anyway, on that note, I'm looking at the time, and we've gone for quite a while. I didn't actually look at the exact moment we started, but I think we've been for over an hour. So maybe this would be a good place to finish
Beautiful.
the talk.
Thank you so much.
Oh God, yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for spending this time with me and for us having this time together. I'm so grateful. And for all the listeners out there, may this talk that Andrew and I have engaged in be entertaining and interesting to you, and may it support your ability to find the rest of the iceberg, to integrate those deep experiences of your own divinity folding in on its own nature and self-producing all the resources that give rise to this relative field. May we as a collective, because Andrew and I can't do it together, there's no point in us doing this just, maybe there's a little point, just the two of us, but the real point is that we are in the middle of a huge, massive collective transformation, which requires each one of us. And I do feel that one of the outcomes of this will be a recognition of the preciousness of life itself. And how each one of us has something that we contribute, which is absolutely beyond measure valuable. Valuable from the perspective of the Mother of Creation looking upon each one of us and knowing each one of us to be inexpressively precious. So may everyone come to know that level of themselves, even if we can't at this time express it perfectly at the surface. Maybe we will be able to if we work together collectively in the future. That would be really nice. Did you want to say something, Andrew?
No, that's it. Thank you so much
Oh,
for the opportunity
thank you.
to speak with you here.
Yeah,
Really
it's been really fun. It's been really lovely. And stay safe, everybody. Stay
Yes.
in, stay safe. And we'll look forward to coming out of this when the danger has passed and rebuild ourselves even better than before. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.